Okay, perfect. The recording has started. And with that, we can kick in the session. So hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again in this online edition of the MuleSoft meetups. As I mentioned before, I'm Angela Ricci. I enjoy doing these sessions, one of the earliest leaders. And today we have a full pack agenda around Runtime Fabric and the foundations of Runtime Fabric with Preez. Before we jump into that, though, we need to review a couple of things just to keep in mind. This is all made by the online group. This is thanks to Manik and Royston that originated the community. These were initiatives in APAC, in Asia, and in America, and then came here to the Europe meetups, Europe, Middle East, and Africa with myself. With that said, some other things that are important to keep in mind when we talk about these meetups. Remember that the training website is right there. There is a page specifically for any training queries that you may have. There's help.learn.mulesoft.com, and then you will be able to submit your request. If you're having problems with a voucher, with a certification, that is the place to go. There's a new announcement that is around the Mule 4 MCD voucher. Now you will get a voucher when you finish your free self-serve course, and you will be able to go and pass your certification with that voucher. This will be quite helpful for anyone that is trying to get updated the certification, or anyone from Mule 3 that is trying to get some new experience in their portfolio. Now, for any questions, you can use the help.mulesoft.com as per usual for the community. And one that I specifically recommend when you're having questions around data with, you can use Stack Overflow. There is a lot of initiatives inside MuleSoft to use a Stack Overflow for any questions that are related to data with. So that could be one of the best places to post your question. With that said, let's go some more guidelines and announcements that I think you will find quite interesting. So first, for the questions, you may have questions during the session, pop them in the chat. The community, anyone in the community will try to help you. And if you still have the question, and this is for our logistics sakes, try to paste it again at the end of the session. So that way we can read it for you in your behalf, and then we can ask Preez around it. There's another point here that is around filling the survey. Please fill the survey at the end of the session and tell us what you're thinking. If it's good, if it's bad, what else you would like to see, what other things are you interested. And the recordings are going to be shared in the meetups page and in the YouTube channel as per usual. And now some incoming events that you will like. So the first one, and it's coming this year, is the Data Week Beta. You need to stay tuned. It's not released yet. Don't try to play with it. It's not there yet. It's going to be released at around December. And basically what it means is that you will be able to have some snippets of the documentation, and you can run them in your Data Week. As some of you know, the Data Week Playground, you will be able to have a link directly between the documentation and the Data Week snippets. So you can try them right away, and you can see the tutorials with the snippets. This is coming in around December. It's not there yet. So in the meanwhile, what you can do, if you want to have a Data Week instance, you can follow this post from one of our community leaders, Alexandra, and I will share the links afterwards when Chris is at the end of the session. And you will be able to install Docker, and you will be able to run it locally for now. It will be released in the early December. Okay, so there's a new thing that I wanted to bring to the meetups, and it's around the Ideas portal. I want to get a sense of how do you feel about the Ideas portal. We're going to cover this at the end of the session, so you can think about some ideas that you submitted that have been not treated, or how has your experience with the Ideas portal been so far. This will touch base at the end of the session. We will reserve the last 10 minutes. And these that you see in the screen are some common ones that I get from customers. We will talk about that later on. Now, some interesting announcements for the next session on the 18th November. That's from zero to batch. It will be given by Anu, one of the part of the customer success, one of our technical architects, and that will be published in the events page in early next week. Just so you're aware, if you're interested, keep it in mind. One of the hottest announcements that we have, the MuleSoft Hackathon. You have heard of it plenty of times, and now it's finally live. So you can access the MuleSoft Hackathon website that you see there in the screen. I will share the links in the chat as well. And you can also join tomorrow's session. The tomorrow session will be led by Royston, and they will explain you all the details about what country restrictions apply or what conditions you need to fulfill for the hackathon. To get you excited about it, and you may see this going around in LinkedIn, these are the prizes for the first place, the second place, and the third place. So you can think about a package worth around $5,500 and there is the full recap of what that means. You have a drop control mechanics keyboard, you have the hackathon swag package. Royston will talk about that tomorrow. And if you're not able to attend the session of Royston tomorrow, make sure to tune in for the recording, always in the same place. With that, I already took 6 minutes, Chris. I apologize for that. I will give it right to you, and we can start with our Runtime Fabric Foundations. Let's stop the screen sharing here. And Chris, you should be able now to share your screen.
Excellent. Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Hey, Angel, all good? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen, and we.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to talk at this meetup. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Just to introduce myself, I keep calling myself a new joiner to MuleSoft, but that's wearing a little bit thin at this point in time. I've been here for about 4 months. I joined MuleSoft in July from a customer, and Angel and I are in the same team. We're in the customer success team, and I'm also a customer success architect. I'd like to just set the scene for this session. Seeing as I also newly joined MuleSoft, and not having had any exposure to Runtime Fabric as a deployment topology, I had to learn myself, and I had to build my own foundation really in terms of understanding how Runtime Fabric works as a deployment topology for our product, and when this is the best deployment topology to recommend for our customers. So having said that, I'd just like to talk through the session, and you'll see it's very much themed along, starting out with what are the problem statements, where can we find resources around Runtime Fabric, and then we'll go into, I would say, medium level of depth in terms of what Runtime Fabric is itself. And I'll just highlight three foundational steps, which I think are some pitfalls which we really love to see our customers avoid. And then I'll finish up by just really wrapping it up nicely and saying when Runtime Fabric works really well for our customers. So with that, I'd like to start by saying at MuleSoft, we want to be the engine for digital transformation at our customer sites. We prioritize to connect data from any system, no matter where it resides, and really delivery at speed with strong agility and high levels of innovation is really, that's what we're about. That's what we love to do. And we want to do all of these things at an enterprise scale. But the challenge comes in when you look at the variety of customers and their differing strategies and organizational approaches. It's just vastly diversified. And coming up with a single product and a single platform, again, core to what we do, makes that a rather tricky affair. Very few customers have exactly the same cloud strategy, data center architectures, or technology strategies. And as such, we have come up with what's starting to feel like a vast array of different deployment topologies for our Anypoint platform. Now, when we consider the digital transformation journey that most organizations are on today, Asterix as a service solutions, containerization, and cloud native strategies will always feature rather heavily. We will start today by looking at the dilemma facing organizations today and how our different deployment topologies can be applied. Then I'll highlight the resources I used to produce this talk. We will then step into the background of why RTF came about and why we invested in it so heavily. Then we will look at some considerations for those thinking about using RTF, step into the architecture that underpins RTF, and then I'll finish up with two sections. Firstly, looking at some top tips to be aware of, and then just a consideration of which scenarios and which characteristics indicate RTF as the ideal deployment topology. And as Angel mentioned, we will do our best to answer questions at the end, but unfortunately, we will have to time box that session. So the dilemma, just by the fact that you're all in the session today, for which we're extremely thankful, I'm sure you all appreciate the technology challenges that our modern enterprises face today. Most, if not all, of the organizations operating today have to embrace a digital transformation journey of some scale or element to remain relevant in the industry. Now, pressures to change do not only come from competitors or from the market, but they also come from, I want to call them, a new generation of consumers. I recently found myself in a situation where I actually ended up paying a higher price for a product simply because from a different vendor, simply because that vendor could deliver the product to me sooner. And at risk of painting a negative picture about myself as a consumer, I mean, I even compromised on the actual model that I looked at, purely because of the speed at which the other vendor could deliver it to me. In order to satisfy, as an organization, this always-on immediate gratification marketplace that organizations operate in now, it becomes increasingly difficult for those enterprises operating on traditional technology stacks. Now, before I start sounding too much like a salesman, let's step into some generic technology stacks approaches or strategies and how we provide deployment topologies to address them. Just to clarify what I talk about when I'm talking about control plane and runtime plane, this is a view of our entire Anypoint platform. And anything northwards of that engage Anypoint exchange model you see there, or block you see there, and upwards is essentially what we call our control plane. And anything south side of that is really our runtime plane. Now, the runtime plane is really where your APIs, your integration applications, and other related services actually run. And this is where your data flows. Now, the separation between our runtime plane and the control plane is important because that enables us to support the variety of different deployment options. Now, what we're looking at today is Runtime Fabric. And in that instance, your runtime plane can be hosted where your data resides. You can deploy your Runtime Fabric in a DMZ to host your APIs, or you can also have your Runtime Fabric powering your internal integration apps and batch processes. Now, what's really cool is all of that is managed and controlled via the single control plane, which is hosted on your behalf in the cloud by MuleSoft. So let's have a look at some of the let's call them the positions or the situations that customers find themselves in. They're somewhere along the migration from left to right to this slide that you're looking at now. So the traditional on-prem organizations typically have applications which are built and deployed to virtual machines or bare metal or tin and their customer-hosted infrastructure. It's an approach, an IT or technology approach for an organization which has been around for a long time, and there are various vendors which play in that market and aim to make this landscape simpler, more flexible, more available, and more scalable. Now, most companies still using this approach has invested in this and refined it over time, both from a hardware and software perspective, to get it as close to fit for purpose and as efficient as possible. And some, but not all, of the really attractive benefits of cloud-specific or cloud-native can be provisioned with extra technology stacks and configurations, but those do require significant investment in both products and product specialists, internal or consultative, to help run those for the organization. And this typically leads to a pretty high cost to income ratio. Now, the asterisk as a service there is, apologies for my typo, there's infra or platform as a service. And the apps are deployed and built using containers, using technologies like Docker and Kubernetes. They have things like automatic high availability and auto scaling to an extent which becomes possible. But in this scenario, it's almost like this approach spans the old and the new, with organizations typically needing physical infrastructure or paying someone to host it on their behalf. But you also require that investment in the software side and the as a service platforms and the experts to actually run and maintain the container orchestration technologies. The trade-off here is that you have strong flexibility and avoidance of underlying infra vendor lock-in if carefully considered and implemented. And then stepping all the way to the right, we look at the full cloud native, which is where all of our startups have the luxury of playing, but organizations with a bit of technology legacy finds it rather difficult to just jump straight in. The apps are typically designed and built to operate fully on a cloud-based platform, and that significantly reduces the infrastructure footprint required, and can have a commercial benefit if it's managed carefully and understood deeply. And this is where the lovely availability and disaster recovery benefits are really built in and taken care of to an extent. However, cloud native expertise are required to run both a platform and to design and build applications. And another issue or possible challenge here is that you could, if you're not careful as an enterprise, as a CIO, find yourself rather locked in for that underlying cloud provider. Think if you build your applications in AWS and you adopt all of the AWS specific technologies and they choose to push their prices up by 20%, that's a bad position to be in. So none of the approaches are perfect. Ultimately, organizations find themselves somewhere along the path from left to right, typically, when we look at our customer base today. Now, MuleSoft has a deployment topology that fits in with these approaches or these specific scenarios. So for the traditional organizations, we have our on-prem deployment. So the runtimes are deployed to customer provisioned infrastructure. They simply extracted to customer virtual machines or bare metal, connected to the control plane, and then entirely managed by the customer. So the ancillary configuration here, like networks, load balancers, proxies, firewalls, are all for the customer to own. Then for the, let's call this the PaaS with a twist solution from a MuleSoft perspective, this is where what we're talking to today. This is our Runtime Fabric offering. And it's MuleSoft's answer to a containerized customer-hosted deployment topology. We will approach that in more depth today. And the twist here is really that even though our customers can inherit and benefit from the advantages that the Asterisk as a service solution brings, they don't necessarily need to understand the inner workings of the underlying Dockers and Kubernetes clusters, as an example. And then our full cloud-based offering, of course, being Cloud Hub. We have a large portion of our customer base on this deployment topology. And this is where both the runtime plane and the control plane are hosted on our customer's behalf by MuleSoft in the cloud. And as with Runtime Fabric, again, there is an additional value offering here where we also take away the management and the understanding of the underlying complexities of the cloud-native provider, which we currently run on, and protect the customers from that. Now, where are some useful resources for you to build your own knowledge on well, all of these deployment topologies, but specifically today for Runtime Fabric? So I've listed a number of resources here. So the first is a short marketing video on what Runtime Fabric is. The second is a really nice webinar on our site, again, specifically to Runtime Fabric. And then, of course, the rather detailed MuleSoft documentation site. And another thing to highlight is the training course specifically for the operations side of Runtime Fabric. Highly recommended if your organization is invested in Runtime Fabric. And then, in my opinion, a vastly underutilized resource is our Catalyst Knowledge Hub, which is really a wealth of self-help information, including some useful guides and help articles surrounding Runtime Fabric. And then the last item there is just some further background if you're interested in understanding how Kubernetes and Docker specifically works. However, not necessarily knowledge that you would need if you're only invested in Runtime Fabric. And we'll get to why as we step through this presentation. Now, why did MuleSoft invest in Runtime Fabric? When looking across our customer base, we recognize that our customers need a lot of flexibility given the number of technology challenges that we're seeing today. Most of them are invested in some level of multi-cloud strategy. And the largest cloud provider uptake we found in our customer base by a significant margin was Amazon Web Services and Azure. We also recognize that our customers wanted those benefits of containerization, the automated failovers, and high availability, but the barrier to entry was considered to be, or perceived to be, too much of a threat. So we focused on these three benefits. So we wanted to build a solution which supports that multi-hybrid cloud approach. We know companies have data across multiple different systems, across different clouds and data centers. And so they find themselves needing to build an application network that encompasses the clouds they're using to maximize the use of the data that resides on each of them so that they can just create those really, truly connected experiences for their customers. They wanted to leverage that high availability. They needed the services powering these experiences to always be ready and available. Otherwise, they're not providing value. It's not really a new consideration, this, but it becomes increasingly important given the pressures in technology pressures we're seeing today. And then that low barrier to entry. So we wanted our customers to be able to manage these services across multiple clouds and data centers without that requiring an increase in the management overhead or cost. And it shouldn't require learning and understanding the full complexity of the underlying containerization and orchestration services. So now let's finally get to what is Runtime Fabric. So it is essentially a container service that automates the deployment and orchestration of Mule applications and API gateways. You can install that on your own provisioned Azure as a customer, on AWS, on VMs or bare metal. For the AWS installation, we provide some Terraform scripts to set up the fabric itself. For Azure, we've got some Azure Resource Manager templates. And then for the two on-prem approaches, really, or VMs or bare metal approaches, we have a detailed installation guide. Now, this effectively means that if you cast your mind back to the diagram, or you look at the one to the right of the slide, this is where our runtime plane essentially becomes a runtime fabric, and your control plane is hosted in the cloud for you by MuleSoft. Now, RTF is a very powerful technology or set of technologies, but you would have all have heard this one. With great power comes great responsibility. And before deciding to deploy anything to your runtime fabric, there are some considerations I'd just like to talk through. We do have, with Runtime Fabric, a shared responsibility model. Now, MuleSoft is in charge of managing the Runtime Fabric appliance and the delivered Runtime Fabric components, the Runtime Fabric software appliance, the Runtime Fabric agent, the Mule runtime engines, and any other dependencies to run Mule applications in your fabric. However, the customer is responsible for provisioning, configuring, and managing the infrastructure required for the Runtime Fabric. Now, that includes the VM resources, CPU, memory, the disk performance and capacity, operating systems, kernel patching, network ports, synchronization of system time across all VMs. And the customers will need their DevOps teams, their network teams, and their security teams to participate in and agree on the configuration of the fabric. So the DevOps team typically to provision and manage the infrastructure, the network team to specify the allowed ports and configure the proxy settings, and then the security team to verify compliance and obtain security certificates. Now, having said all of that, what are the benefits you can look forward to if you choose to go for Fabric? So, quite a powerful slide. I think deploy consistently across any cloud, Azure and AWS, or your data center. Run multiple runtime versions in the same Fabric. Scale horizontally and redeploy with zero downtime. Easily managed via that single control plane hosted by MuleSoft. And there are no resources required to support or maintain the orchestration and the automation of the underlying infra. Now, let's step into the architecture. And the first slide is really a great place for us to start having this conversation. So what is the controller? The controller is essentially a VM which is dedicated to operating the runtime fabric, okay? Including orchestration services, a distributed database, load balancing, and other services that enable you to manage the cluster from any point platform. The workers are VMs dedicated for running your Mule apps and API gateways. Now, that separation is core to enabling scaling of the worker nodes based on the number of Mule apps, or scaling the controller nodes based on the frequency of deployments, changes in application state, or the amount of inbound traffic. To ensure resources are available to reschedule and redeploy applications in the event of hardware failure, we do recommend over-provisioning of the number of worker nodes. By default, the services operating Runtime Fabric are deployed across the controller nodes to avoid a single point of failure. The Fabric uses a set of technologies. Now, I'm not going to go into them all in depth, but they do include Docker and Kubernetes, and they are tuned specifically to operate well with Mule runtimes. I do need to stress that knowledge of these underlying technologies is not required. Managing the runtime fabric requires the operational infrastructure level experience needed to support any enterprise system at scale, really. We do, however, recommend, if you're going for the runtime fabric route, to follow best practices and to run fire drill scenarios to make sure that you are covered in your controlled environments, to make sure that you really have that protection from the unknown, essentially. Now, there are some limitations I do need to mention for Runtime Fabric. So the maximum number of controller nodes supported is 5. Max number of worker nodes is 16. The maximum number of replicas that can be deployed per worker node is 40. However, we recommend that you run no more than 20 to 25. And we'll get into the reason for that when we talk about resource allocations. The maximum number of environments per Runtime Fabric is 50. And the maximum number of runtime fabrics you can create in a business group is 50. Now, importantly, the object store persistence is not currently supported for fabric clusters. And there's a table there highlighting the internal load balancer performance. I will get into those again a little bit later, but it is worth mentioning that there's 2 models and there is a sort of a consideration that needs to be made in terms of how large or how much resource you want to allocate towards your load balancer configurations. So now let's look at an example non-production fabric architecture. So again, I've highlighted this in red, so it's not recommended for production. It's intended for testing only. But this configuration has at least 1 controller and then the 2 workers. Excuse me. The controller node runs the internal load balancer and the agents used to connect to any point platform. And the communication between the agent and the any point platform will always be outbound. So multiple replicas of applications can run across workers. And now let's step into a production configuration. The new component on this slide being the TCP load balancer. So we do strongly recommend that in a production fabric, it gets fronted by a customer provision TCP load balancer. Okay. The minimum requirements are 3 controller and 3 worker nodes. The 3 controller nodes enables full tolerance of losing 1 controller. To improve that, if you wanted to cover for the loss of 2 controllers, you'd need to have 5 controller nodes in the cluster. And the Mule applications run on the workers, and again, you can deploy the replicas across the workers. So here's the network architecture. So this shows, again, the external customer provision TCP load balancer used to load balance requests across the internal load balancers running on the controllers. Now, when you do enable those internal load balancers, there are two modes in which the internal load balancers can operate. They can either operate in shared mode, which is the default setting. So in this mode, the internal load balancer runs on all controller nodes with sufficient CPU and memory. The other approach is a dedicated node, whereby because dedicated internal load balancers use all the available resources for running that internal load balancer, you cannot specify the amount of CPU cores and memory allocated towards dedicated load balancers. It will just consume all of the resource on that node. Now, it is worth mentioning that the reason why you would go for a dedicated load balancer here is if you have higher inbound traffic, and that's really where the dedicated load balancers per cluster come in. So here's an example of a front-to-back flow. So the incoming HTTP request is forwarded to the external load balancer. The TCP load balancer forwards the request to an available internal load balancer on the fabric. The internal load balancer will decrypt the request and direct it to an available replica of the Mule app in the diagram, and the application sends a response which is routed back to the requester. You will note that there are some health check ports which the external TCP load balancer can use to determine whether the internal controller nodes are up. So now there are some areas which I'm sure you can appreciate that the Runtime Fabric solution is a complex one. I think there are just a couple of top tips which are really good to note with regards to Runtime Fabric. Firstly, being resource allocation. So how does resource allocation work in a Runtime Fabric? So it is an important point to determine the correct number of resources that you want to allocate towards your Mule applications. So when a Mule app is deployed to Fabric, the application is deployed to its own runtime engine. Okay. Now the number of replicas or the instances of that app essentially and the runtime are also specified. Okay. Now the resources available for each replica essentially are determined by the values you set when deploying that app. The performance provided later on in this allocation topic is based on a Runtime Fabric cluster with controller nodes using AWS EC2 M4 instances. There are 3 M4 large controller nodes, 3 R4 large worker nodes. The M4 instances has custom Intel Xeon processors that are optimized specifically for EC2. They run at a base clock of 2.4 gigahertz, and they can burst up to 3 with Turbo Boost. And the load generator, which generated these results, was hosted on a separate AWS instance in the same region. Now, you can allocate vCPU cores and memory. When allocating vCPU cores, there are 2 parameters to specify. There's the reserved vCPU, and then there's the vCPU limit. Now, the reserved vCPU is the amount of vCPU guaranteed to the application and reserved for its use. And the vCPU limit is the maximum amount of vCPU the application can use. So essentially the level to which it can burst. I'll talk to that in a little bit. And then also the memory, like I mentioned. Now, the physical CPU core capacity often differs from the MuleSoft license core amount. Okay. The physical CPU core capacity is the CPU capacity provided by Runtime Fabric to the worker nodes, which is displayed as vCPU utilization in the Fabric console. The MuleSoft license core amount is the entitlement needed for the Mule application deployment. Okay, you cannot purchase fractional MuleSoft license core amounts. So as an example, if you only needed 1.5 cores, you would need to purchase a license for 2 cores from MuleSoft. Now, this is the good bit. So you're only required to purchase a license for the compute power you utilize. So the underlying Runtime Fabric cluster does not need to be licensed, the underlying resource. So the actual application core utilization must be less than or equal to the MuleSoft license core amount purchased. And to measure that utilization, there is an Op Center, a dashboard inside the RTF Op Center for you to utilize. Now back to the vCPU allocation. So this is an important point and can be applied quite effectively. So when the reserved vCPU and the vCPU limit are the same, the CPUs on the worker node is allocated in, the CPU is essentially allocated in a guaranteed model, okay? So the container always has the specified amount of CPU available. So that's reserved regardless of what else runs on that worker node, okay? So guaranteed allocation allows consistency in performance, and it ensures there's no CPU contention between other applications, and it guarantees that performance in all cases. There is, however, another model whereby you can specify the vCPU limit to be higher than the reserved vCPU. And that essentially enables the concept of bursting on the CPUs on those nodes. So the containers you've deployed in a bursting fashion can burst up to either the vCPU limit value or the amount of unreserved vCPU on the worker node, whichever of the two is less. Okay. When using CPU bursting, you must consider that the minimum reserved vCPU is 0.02 and the minimum vCPU limit is 0.07. Okay. And of course, CPU limit being upper bounded by the CPU cores provided on the worker nodes. Okay. Now, this is where we get into detail why we recommend the maximum recommended utilization per CPU core is 20 to 25 simple applications or API gateways. Now, when the applications get more complex, we do recommend, of course, allowing them more and granting or allowing them more CPU capacity. It is worth mentioning that Fabric runs a small amount of services on the worker nodes. Now, these services consume between 0.3 and 0.5 vCPU, depending on whether log forwarding is enabled for endpoint monitoring. Applications can compete for the unallocated CPU remaining on the worker node. Now, as more applications are deployed on top of that particular worker node, of course, less unallocated CPU is available, and that can result in poor performance. So there are some strategies you can play with. First of these being deploying your nightly batch applications with other applications that have peak load during the day, as an example, or deploying multiple replicas of applications so that they're distributed across the worker nodes to maximize the surface area for unallocated CPU across your cluster. But regardless of which approach is chosen, if you wanted to go for bursting or guaranteed, it is, of course, always good practice to just make sure that you run tests to validate that you're getting the performance that you're looking for. Now, I'd like to say that the memory allocation is much simpler than the vCPU. So the minimum amount of memory we can allocate in Mule 4 is 0.7 gigs, and in Mule 3 is 0.5. When endpoint monitoring is enabled, another 50 meg is reserved for running endpoint monitors sidecar containers, which can burst up to 70 meg for each app deployed when processing metrics data. And endpoint platform allocates native and heap memory for deployed apps. The heap memory is essentially the portion of the total memory that's made available to the Mule runtime and the application. And that memory is used for tasks like handling payloads. So both Cloud Hub and Runtime Fabric allocate both types of memory. However, they differ slightly in how the memory allocation of each memory type is allocated. Fabric lists the total memory available. So Runtime Fabric lists the total memory available for an application, and the available heap memory is approximately half of that figure, whereas Cloud Hub describes minimum memory requirements in terms of the heap memory available to an application. So the impact of all of this resource selection essentially is, as an example shown here in terms of application startup. So you can see that there is a vast difference when you're using a worker of a size 0.07 as opposed to a 1 vCPU core to application startup time. And there's also a clear difference when you start looking at the number of requests that we can deal with, the response times. So Again, we can't tell you what would work best for your organization, but understanding resource allocation and making some good informed decisions when you do that can be a key enabler for your fabric and getting the most out of it. Now, the next topic is one which will keep our security colleagues quite happy. I'm not going to go into detail about that. I have put the link into the slide here to the hardening checklist, and that really is exactly what it says on the tin. Those are a couple of steps to consider to make sure that your runtime fabric is provisioned according to best practices. And then I'd like to just step into something which will make our security colleagues really happy. Now, I'm going to talk about endpoint security now. And this is an additional offering which is designed to work with RTF. It provides capabilities to configure edge policies, tokenization, and secret management. But I do need to stress that this is a separately licensable component, but definitely worth considering in the context of Runtime Fabric, to just have that one single platform where you manage your entire Mule estate front to back. So endpoint security provides a layered approach to secure your application network. And these layers really work together to protect both the application network and the network's individual nodes by controlling access to APIs, enforcing policies, and proxying all inbound or outbound traffic to mitigate external threats and attacks. Now, endpoint security provides you with a dedicated endpoint to detect attacks and to validate traffic without taxing your network infrastructure itself. So, as an example, it provides some edge policies to prevent denial. So it provides denial of service protection, as an example, to prevent flooding of application network with large numbers of requests. It provides an IP whitelisting policy, which restricts access to your underlying application network to only authorized parties. HTTP limits policies, which prevent large payload sizes from consuming bandwidth. And then web application firewall policy for request and response traffic to provide protection at the web application level. It also provides a tokenization service, and this is an integrated mechanism to apply tokenization to sensitive data that we touch as part of the integration journey. So examples of these are credit card numbers, PI information, or primary account numbers. The service creates format preserving tokens, and that prevents all kinds of format related challenges downstream in your application network. And it can be applied either as a policy in an API proxy, or the service can be exposed as a service for other Mule applications to use. And the last proposition in endpoint security is the secrets manager. Now, the secrets manager uses secure vault technology to store and control access to private keys, passwords, certificates, and other secrets. And you can use this to write and manage your secrets, your keys, and your transport layer security artifacts. Okay. Now, important to note, you can then read the metadata about the secrets, but the actual secrets themselves are consumed into the platform only by authorized platform services on your behalf. It's designed to store and manage secrets for supported endpoint platform services, and it is not a general purpose storage for secrets to be consumed into the wider organization outside of MuleSoft. Only trusted services inside the endpoint platform have access to the underlying secrets. The secrets manager supports the management of your TLS contexts for the following services. So that's for your Runtime Fabric ingress, where you can store your TLS certificates in a secrets manager and then configure your Fabric ingress with the secret reference, or alternatively, the API manager in Cloud Hub, where you can store your TLS artifacts in secret manager and then configure endpoint API manager with the secret reference. So the secret manager enables you to store secrets in secret groups as well, which are essentially vaults associated with your environments and business groups. And each secrets group will have its own set of encryption keys, which are generated and managed by the secrets manager. Then you can configure the supported Anypoint Platform services to request secrets stored in Secrets Manager, and you can control which of the supported services are authorized to access them. So this task is handled by two microservices inside the platform. They are the Secrets Manager, which is a publicly exposed service that handles the uploading and storing of your secrets. So on uploading of your secret to the vault, the Secrets Manager establishes a reference to it so that the reference can be shared or read without revealing its contents. Again, worth stressing that you can read the secret metadata, but not the secret itself. And then the secrets provider, which is the internal service that handles the secrets for consumption by the supported platform services. Now, this is the only service that can read the actual secrets, and due to its nature, it's not accessible from the public network. So just to wrap up, let's look at when Runtime Fabric can be selected and applied very effectively. So everyone wants to move to the cloud these days. A number of companies have invested heavily in cloud infrastructure. They may have spent a lot of money on their own internal AWS or Azure instances, and they really want to leverage that. And Runtime Fabric is a really good fit for them to do that, as they can deploy their runtimes to their own cloud while maintaining their managed cloud benefits. Okay. Several organizations today are interested in Docker, Kubernetes, and containerization initiatives. So the interesting thing here is that containerization is really a concept that's about 5 to 6 years old. Excuse me, but if you look at how that's currently being adopted, it really is being adopted at an alarming rate. And companies are finding it really, really difficult to find and attract those skilled resources that can help them accomplish their containerization and Kubernetes initiatives. Runtime Fabric is built on Kubernetes, and so the customers can accomplish their containerization initiatives without any need for the MuleSoft dedicated people to really know Docker or Kubernetes, although they can still get those benefits. A number of our on-premise customers also have the need to automate their deployments, isolate their applications, and scale to get the resources they need. Now, this usually means spending a lot of money on the aforementioned additional technologies or manual efforts. But with Runtime Fabric, again, our customers just get these benefits out of the box. They don't need any manual effort. And finally, some customers are in restricted industries, so such as government or finance, and they want to manage cloud benefits, but they cannot deploy to Cloud Hub or private cloud. Okay, so here, Runtime Fabric is an easy way for them to get their managed cloud benefits while deploying on their own premises. So with that, I think that's where I'll pause. I don't know if Angel, have you had any questions that we can tackle?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you very much, Chris, for making the time to make this session and help the community. We have around 3 or 4 questions, so we should have enough time. We have around 7 minutes more. So the first one comes from Jesse Carrigan. It's around the limitation on nodes. Is that total number of is that the total number of nodes, meaning the total number of nodes for the Runtime Fabric environment? That is around the limitation on nodes.
Let's go back to that slide so I can answer that. Sorry, I'm just going back. So this is the slide we're referring to. So which number of nodes, controllers, workers, which were we referring to?
Jesse, could you specify which one you were referring to? We don't have it, Chris.
Okay. So what I can do from mine is so when you look at the first line, they're saying the number of worker nodes, max being 16, inside the Runtime Fabric, that's referring to the VMs that run inside a fabric. So there could be 16 VMs that you use to deploy your applications on top of. And similarly for the controller nodes, replicas per worker node essentially are the number of I would say applications you can deploy within a particular worker node. I hope that sort of way towards answering the question.
Yeah, Jesse, let us know if that did answer the question, and otherwise we'll keep going on. There's another
Yeah,
one
sure.
coming from Sumev Kohli around what is the minimum vCPU for a CPU?
What is the minimum vCPU for
For
a
a,
actual CPU?
yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. Maybe something we can ask someone. Is someone else in the session able to answer that question?
I will drop the documentation on that one, Sumev. Sorry that we cannot get back on that one. And I'm assuming that in that chapter, they will explain around both how to improve the resource allocation and the question you specifically have around the vCPU. We will move on to the question of Gel. This one is if there's any more information in MuleSoft documentation or content created by the community about the possible strategies to maximize resource utilization.
Right. So to that topic, I would, unfortunately, I don't know offhand, but what I would really strongly recommend is having a look at the Catalyst Knowledge Hub. There may be some articles in there. There are definitely, I've seen some good guides and artifacts there in terms of how to set up and install your Runtime Fabric. However, I would say that if you don't find the answers you're looking for, I would refer that to your organizational CSM, and maybe they can then pass that up the chain to Angel or or whichever theater you're in, to your customer success teams, and we can try and get that answer for you.
Yeah, just so everyone is aware, the Catalyst is this website that you as a customer developer, as a customers of MuleSoft, as a MuleSoft developer, you have access, even as a partner, you can access and get the best practices on many different areas of the product. I dropped the link there. And with that, we will pass for the next question. It's again around from Sumev. Is if we do have the capability to run containers through Kubernetes security tools like Aqua or Stack Rocks or any equivalent from MuleSoft?
So the answer, according to my best knowledge, is no. So the runtime fabric does not equal bring your own Kubernetes. So it's not a guarantee that what you can do with a vanilla Kubernetes instance, you'll be able to do with Runtime Fabric. Runtime Fabric should be installed alongside your existing Kubernetes infrastructure. And if you have invested in a large microservices estate on your own Kubernetes, I would suggest looking at our service mesh offering to see if there's something that you could leverage from there. It is a relatively new offering, however, very powerful in that space.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chris. And just adding a note there, there's some plans for bring your own Kubernetes, but that is still not there. So that will be in the future.
Yeah, I forgot to put the safe harbor statement up, but yeah, you're right, Angel.
Yes, we need to talk about the safe harbor statement. Please don't take your decisions based on this information that we're disclosing. Okay, anyways, we continue with that one. The next one is from Ben Chen. So the question is if we can use the secrets manager for storing partner credentials and access that through from the MuleSoft APIs.
Sorry, what type of credentials?
Using secrets manager for storing partner credentials and access that from the Mule APIs.
From a B2B perspective, I assume.
It seems so. I could also assume that, well, yeah, let's assume that it's B2B.
Again, that is a really good question. If the APIs are deployed, so you're essentially referring to APIs possibly deployed in Cloud Hub, in the public facing, in public workers, and then you want to actually have the partner call in there, and then essentially that goes into your VPC and into your private, or are you referring to a runtime fabric that it goes into? I think before I get myself in a complete twist here, I think I unfortunately, I can't answer that question unless I have all the detail in terms of what exactly that flow would look like. But as far as I know, the best practice use of Secrets Manager is for your internal application network to store your own internal TLS artifacts and other credentials, and to leverage that in your internal application network.
Okay, Chris, it seems that that answers as well the question. Thank you for that. And we have space for one last question. Sorry about the other two people that have asked. This one is from Srinivasa. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And it's around if Runtime Fabric workers node similar to Cloud Hub workers in terms of how many applications can be deployed into them?
They are similar, but they are not the same. You can get slightly better bang for your buck from a Runtime Fabric worker perspective than you could get from a Cloud Hub worker. That goes back to the minimum worker size you're allowed to specify in a Runtime Fabric being 0.07 as opposed to 0.1 of a CPU in Cloud Hub. So they are similar, but you get slightly more value from a Runtime Fabric worker.
Okay, Chris, we do have two more questions, but I need to end it here because we need to do a quick introduction of the Ideas portal. So for the people that we didn't answer the questions, I will try to put that back into the methods page, like a Q&A there in the page. That's for Vineal Phillips, for Sri Kumar, and yeah, Sri Kumar again, and Vineal Phillips again. You have 2 and 2 questions each. Well, with that, we conclude the Chris session. Thank you very much, Chris, for sharing up with us. And
I will highly recommend Anu's session. She's she's going to be really good.
Yes, Chris is mentioning Anu's session for those that joined it late, the 18th November. And before we tune out, and if you're interested, I want to hear your opinion around the Ideas portal. So you have here about the Ideas, MuleSoft Ideas portal, and basically the job that I'm trying to do is to leverage the experience, the feedback from people that have worked directly with the Ideas portal to see what do you think about it. So if you can think about 3 words, how is that for you? How do you think the Ideas portal has worked for you? Yes, thank you for joining. For those that are leaving, this will take 2 minutes more. The link I just shared in the chat basically gives you access to a URL where you can enter 3 words that you can use to define the Ideas portal. You can use anything that is in your mind. Please be aware of a business context. But besides that, if it's great, if it's good, if it's just okay, if it hasn't been a good experience, put those words there because I want to pass this back to the product team. Okay, someone is tasty Chinese food. That's not what I was expecting. But yes, that's okay. Experience, good experience, amazing. Connect. Okay, we're getting there. If you have problems, things like it hasn't been delivered idea that you were waiting for, you can set something like disappointment. You can think about the emotions or any description that you have. When we talk about the Ideas portal, that is in MuleSoft that is where you submit enhancement requests to the product team. We will wait 1 minute more while you do this exercise. And while you're doing this, lastly, think about an idea that you wanted to share with the community, an idea that you, as from your point of view, needs to be there in the MuleSoft product, and paste it in this chat. If you already posted in the Ideas portal, and let me give you very quickly what is the Ideas portal. You can find it here. If there's any idea that you would like the community to review and vote, this is a good chance. Excellent. We're seeing the list getting populated. Thank you for that. And we will give it 2 minutes more. Think about an idea, search for the idea that you posted in before, and paste it into the chat. And what we're going to do is as an exercise in the next meetup, we're going to review that idea as a group. And if anyone wants to vote it because they're going through it, that will be an opportunity for that. Yeah, I can see one there on rejection. Great place to take ideas. Enjoy. Okay, great. Okay, everyone. Posted an idea to reuse activation key. Okay, Sri Kumar, have you posted that idea into the ideas portal? Or just to idea dynamic routing to backend? The goal here is that if you already created an idea in the portal, we will be able to review it with the community. And that way, people will upvote it depending on the requirements. Okay, we will wait 1 minute more and then we will close the session today. Dark theme, that, yeah, fair. That should be already there by end of this year, I believe. The idea was already there. Dark theme. Check. If you would like and this is an example, if you would like the dark theme in Anypoint Studio, this idea that I just pasted into the chat, it's one that is related to that, so you can upvote it. There's one there added, perfect. Thank you for adding that one, Sri Kumar. Thank you for adding that one, Tony. And with that, we will close the session. Thank you everyone for joining. I will be here 5 minutes more if you want to type down your ideas. But with that, we can stop the session. We can let Chris go. I'm sure your daughter is already waiting for you. And thank you everyone for joining today. Please fill the survey with your opinion. That's it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.